I don't think we should worry. The next PressX video won't be longer than 1 hour, 0 minutes, and 0 seconds. Besides, they're unlikely to release a sequel to any game. Today we will begin our story about two add-ons to the iconic Stalker Shadow of Chernobyl, namely about Stalker Clear Sky and Stalker Call of Pripyat. Or in other words, the same Stalker 2, where 2 is two add-ons, which fans of the series received at the end of 2000s. In this video, we will tell you what difficulties the GSC Game World team overcame after the successful release of their dream game. We will tell you how the add-ons were created and which of them were considered a dream game by fans of the franchise. We will also analyze in detail what feature ruined Stalker Clear Sky. You are on the PressX channel. Get comfortable, make sure that you hit the like button, and we are getting started. The path to creating Shadow of Chernobyl was incredibly difficult for GSC Game World. However, as a result, this path led the developers to incredible success. Stalker. Shadow of Chernobyl exceeded 1.6 million copies sold in just a year. And this is only on PC, consoles appeared later. Even despite the large number of pirated versions of the game, it fully paid off, and over the next few years continued to gather a fan community around itself, so the management of GSC Game World decided that money needed to be made here and now. Therefore, they immediately set about developing a sequel to the first game in the series. And in order not to spend another 5 to 6 years developing a new game, the GSC team found a fairly simple and at the same time effective solution. Even while working on Shadow of Chernobyl, the developers had to cut a lot of content from the project that they couldn't bring to an ideal, or at least a working state. Various locations, weapons, creatures, and ideas that turned out to be difficult to implement. Therefore, the developers logically decided to simply gather all the materials cut from the game, refine them. In general, the beginning of development is considered to be September 2006, when the project was called Stalker Anarchy Cell, and was developed as an addition to Stalker Shadow of Chernobyl, which had not yet been released, but had been almost ready. For it, they planned such locations as catacombs, bridge over the Pripyat River, Pripyat dungeons, and generators. They even drew up a special design document for Anarchy Cell, but already during the work on these locations, the team had some problems, which we will talk about a little later. The role of the lead game designer in the team was taken on by a successful programmer, Ruslan Didenko, who managed to gain a reputation as an employee with good organizational skills. In addition, part of the team that worked on the first part of Stalker left shortly after its release. Apparently, fearing being stuck at work for another 6 years or new crunches, soon they founded their own studio, 4A Games, with survival and shooter, but we will talk about that another time. And the GSC team was replenished with new faces. Ilya Tolmachov took the position of art director of the project, and Igor Lobanchikov was responsible for creating graphics. When work on the project started, the team realized that this edition would become a new full-fledged game. Ruslan Didenko recalls, "In the beginning, when we were planning the next game in the Stalker universe, we had the idea to show the Stalker world from a slightly different perspective. Not from the perspective of a lone man fighting against the zone, but from the perspective of some great force that, on the contrary, seeks to prevent this." As a result of the discussions, the main character of the first part, S.T.A.L.K.E.R or the Marked One, became the main antagonist in the sequel to Stalker. And in place of the current game character, they invented a mercenary, who later received the nickname Scar. At the same time, the developers had other more important tasks: to fix the bugs that appeared during the release of Shadow of Chernobyl, to improve the graphics using the X-Ray 1.5 engine, to add support for DirectX 10, and not to mess up anything that was already functioning. To put it bluntly, the Kyiv development team had a lot to do, but just 2 months after the release of Shadow of Chernobyl, on July 11, 2007, GSC announced their new game, Stalker Clear Sky. To tell the truth, no unique details about the development of a full-fledged edition, which became a prequel to the cult Stalker, are known. the developers really took into account all the disadvantages that appeared during the development of the first part of the game, and in the shortest possible time, literally in a year, created the game promised to the fans. The X-Ray 1.5 engine added volumetric lighting, dynamic volumetric smoke, fully volumetric fire, soft water, dynamic surface moisture with possible dripping down, and blurring of field depth. The engine also had such an interesting graphic technique as screen space ambient occlusion, SSAO. It was developed by Vladimir Kajalin, who worked at the German company Crytek, thanks to which this graphic technique was already used in Crysis in 2007. By the way, if you are interested in learning about the history of Crytek, what its Kiev office does, and how the Crysis series changed people's perceptions of first-person shooters, let us know about it in the comments under the video, and we'll continue. In general, the function of creating the effect of three-dimensional rays of light passing through the surroundings of a three-dimensional scene was truly groundbreaking for 2008. But in fact, light is the calling card of Clear Sky, and one of the strongest sides of the game, which, however, did not cover all its problems. But more about the problems later. Thanks to DirectX 10, which was added to the game, the developers were able to create sun rays, light shafts. In modern games, a similar effect occurs often, and is well known to be achieved by adding volumetric fog to the scene. Light falling into the fog scatters and forms sun rays. However, at the time of the creation of Clear Sky in 2008, a similar effect could not be seen in any game. The developers became innovators of such mechanics. In addition, they created the rays that were reflected from surfaces and objects due to the fact that some light particles were reflected on nearby objects. This created a diffusion effect, and the lighting on the location turned out to be softer, and the lighter the texture of the same wall, the more light was reflected from it. Simply put, this is the same vaunted RTX from NVIDIA long before RTX was invented, and costing a few bucks. In nature, such three-dimensional rays also occur, and they are called the optical Tyndall effect. But now we are more interested in the nature of the Stalker. The A-Life system was slightly improved, and the game engine was finalized, and now it already supported a full day and night cycle, which was supplemented by various weather effects: rain, thunderstorms, fog, and dynamic sunlight. Thanks to the improvement of A-Life, NPCs became smarter. They could walk one after another, hide behind cover, use grenades, and jump over obstacles, and the animation of their movements became smoother and more diverse. Now stalkers did not stand still but looked at their weapons or changed their posture. After the release of Stalker, Shadow of Chernobyl, writer Andriy Levitsky was called to write the sequel script. Andriy graduated from Taras Shevchenko National University of Kiev with a degree in philology. However, he never worked by profession. He was a bartender, a freight forwarder, and was a self-taught writer. Already in 2002, Levitsky began publishing his fantasy stories in the magazines Threshold, Seeker, Reality of Fantasy, World of Fantasy, and others. And in 2004, after the release of his children's fantasy novel Kuksa and the Sun's Magic, Dmytro Zenin, the older brother of designer Andriy Zenin, contacted Levitsky and invited the writer to work at GSC Game World. Andriy's first work was the script for the game Heroes of Annihilated Empires, for which he, by the way, won the title of the best debut writer in Europe at the Eurocon conference. And 2 years later, Stalker found Andriy. First, he received a letter from the writer of books in the Stalker universe, Vasyl Orakov, with an offer to write a novel for the series. And already at the end of 2007, Ruslan Didenko approached Levitsky with a request to write a script for the first add-on, Clear Sky. This topic was close and interesting to Andriy because he spent almost all of his childhood in Chernobyl, where his grandmother lived before the accident. To make his work easier, Levitsky was given the previous developments and the early plot of Stalker, Anarchy Cell. Ruslan Didenko and the young game designer Andriy Verpakovsky helped to come up with the plot. By the way, he joined the company on the eve of Shadow of Chernobyl release. So at first, after getting a job, he was engaged in setting up the life simulation system and fixing a bunch of different game bugs. And when it came to developing Clear Sky, Verpakovsky became a level designer, who also continued to fix bugs. Believe me, working on Stalker and bugs are interchangeable concepts. During development, the scriptwriters discussed the plot in the company's conference room and were sometimes joined by the project's art director, Ilya Tolmachov. However, during the game's development process, virtually nothing remained of the original Clear Sky script. According to the first scenario of the project, the main character led scientists from the United Nations to the generators until he was unexpectedly hit by a super powerful emission caused by S.T.A.L.K.E.R's attempt to get to the Chernobyl nuclear power plant. As a result of the emission, the main character was to split in two, as if he were cloned. The real character ended up in the swamp location, and the copy disappeared in an unknown direction. At the same time, the main character was not the only one who was cloned during the emission. According to the developer's plan, there were to be many similar characters in the game, and they were to be called doubles, partially insane copies of people with no memories of the past. The main character who survived the emission was supposed to be picked up by the Clear Sky Patrol. The idea for this faction did not appear during the creation of the game with the same name, but during the creation of Shadow of Chernobyl. The official design document of 2002 contained a brief description of the group. It consisted of only 3 stalkers who were looking for secret documents from the laboratory in order to destroy the exclusion zone. However, in the design document of 2003, the group description changed and became very similar to the final one. Stalkers Ecologists. The group consists of former scientists who are trying to find out what happened. They are investigating the zone and looking for a way to heal the world. They are neutral towards all groups. Nonetheless, the idea of this group went through the entire development process of Shadow of Chernobyl, but it only reached implementation after its release in the add-on. In addition to working on the level design of the future game, Verpakovsky, together with Ruslan Didenko, was engaged in the development of the faction war system, and the same location of swamps was used as the training ground. The faction war, also known as the Big Mess, is a global change in the balance of power between factions, which occurred due to the emergence of new, previously inaccessible territories, which caused a fight for these territories. The developers wanted the player to have the opportunity to join each of the factions, thereby strengthening it, but at the same time, the A-Life system itself would arrange clashes between the factions. When everything started working to the satisfaction of both Andriy and Ruslan, there was about half a year left until the game's release, so they began to hastily implement this system in other locations. In a word, Ruslan Didenko and I worked together to create a faction war on Marsh, the first level. When it turned out to be something we liked, it suddenly turned out that we had half a year until the release, and there was practically no simulation on other levels. We had to quickly cut it. It turned out to be what it turned out to be. It's still a shame. Why exactly were the developers ashamed? We will talk closer to the release, and in the meantime, the development of Clear Sky was nearing completion. Thanks to DirectX 10, the team successfully brought up the graphics, which at that time were slightly lagging behind. So successfully that the future Stalker did not lag behind visually at all from Half-Life 2 Episode 2 or Far Cry 2. And they completed new locations, including swamps, Red Forest, the ghost town of Lemansk, and the deserted hospital. At the same time, the developers not only refined the lighting, but also worked on the assets on the locations. The wooden floor covering is realistically uneven. In some places, the walls were diversified with remnants of wallpaper. In some places, they added pieces of fabric fluttering in the wind. In Lemansk, the anomaly even erased part of the bus. In short, the game was almost ready. Finally, the developers added digital rights management and TAJS copy protection to the project. Apparently, in this way, the team tried to prevent possible piracy because no one wanted to step on the same rake twice. And soon after that, GSC and Clear Sky set off to conquer international gaming exhibitions. But before we find out what kind of Frankenstein's monster the developers ultimately came up with, evaluate the gameplay, and analyze all the pros and cons of Clear Sky, let's briefly recall its plot. What story did Andriy Levitsky and the team write? And was the game's original plot that much different? The events of Clear Sky take place a year before the events that end the story of Stalker, Shadow of Chernobyl. If you missed our video about the first part of the Stalker game series, be sure to pause this video and watch it. This will help you better navigate the lore and plot of Clear Sky. The link to the video about the first part of the series is in the upper right corner of the screen. The year is 2011. 5 years have passed since the second disaster in the exclusion zone, which overshadowed the events of April 1986.
Територію нашої держави треба зробити небезпечною для життя наших громадян.
S.T.A.L.K.E.R has not yet reached the center of the zone, although he has already tried to do so twice. Once, a mercenary nicknamed S.T.A.L.K.E.R, as an escort for a group of scientists, was walking through the swamps towards the center of the zone. Suddenly, the entire group was covered by a super powerful emission. The zone was already tormented by increasingly frequent emissions, but this one turned out to be especially strong. As a result, the anomalous fields shifted, thereby opening roads to places that were previously inaccessible to anyone, the western part of the Red Forest and the abandoned city of Lymansk. Local clans begin to fight among themselves for new territories and key positions. Stalkers die, but others always come to take their place. The anomalies change their location, in some places forming entire clusters of artifacts. At the same time, most of the anomalies in the swamps dispersed, making the area relatively safe for humans. The Blessed Territory was occupied by the Renegades faction, which was largely a gang of thieves and beggars, in a word, criminality. They pushed out representatives of the group of former scientists, called the Clear Sky, to the southwest of the swamps, thereby preventing them from freely conducting research. Mercenary S.T.A.L.K.E.R, who becomes the main character of our story, comes to his senses after the strongest emission at the base of the Clear Sky faction. It turns out that a squad of scientists found him unconscious and took him to Professor Kalancha for examination. The professor examines S.T.A.L.K.E.R and discovers serious damage to the nervous system, but otherwise the mercenary is safe and sound. Schizophrenic in a word, but that's not exactly true. So S.T.A.L.K.E.R comes to his senses, and immediately a certain Lebedev approaches him. It is not clear whether he is a scientist or a professor, just Lebedev comes up and says, "So listen to me carefully, son. There's the zone beyond the wall, dangerous and unpredictable. And there's radiation. And by the way, you're a witcher now." Okay, it's a joke. Well, except that the zone is dangerous and unpredictable. That's why Lebedev's people need help with the renegades. Besides, no one will risk their health to get S.T.A.L.K.E.R out of the swamps anyway. There aren't that many guides in the zone. And the information about the hideout in the Clear Sky group is secret, so by releasing S.T.A.L.K.E.R, Lebedev risks revealing it to the enemy faction.
You're gonna live with me now.
Believing Lebedev's outright blackmail, S.T.A.L.K.E.R sets off to help the second outpost of the Clear Sky. However, upon arriving at the scene when he has dealt with the mutant boars, a new super-powerful emission begins. As a result, another detachment of the Clear Sky lures S.T.A.L.K.E.R to the base. After that, Lebedev asks S.T.A.L.K.E.R to help the group with the capture of the swamps and gives the task strengthen the presence of Clear Sky in the swamps, thereby involving the main character in participating in the first faction war. In addition, Lebedev has found out that with each emission, S.T.A.L.K.E.R.'s endurance, motor skills and reaction speed increase sharply, after which his general well-being deteriorates significantly. In fact, his nervous system burns out, so if the emissions do not stop, the mercenary may lose cognitive functions or simply die. At the same time, the reason for the emissions, according to Lebedev, is that someone has tried to get into the center of the zone and is trying to do it again. Actually, because of this, S.T.A.L.K.E.R is partly interested in finding and eliminating the zone's troublemakers, and thereby preserving his nervous system. After clearing the swamp of renegades, Lebedev contacts S.T.A.L.K.E.R and sends him to Sidorovich on the border. There, S.T.A.L.K.E.R can allegedly find out information about the stalker who had recently been interested in strange details from Sidorovich. Having reached the border, S.T.A.L.K.E.R finds Sidorovich, but the merchant in the basement refuses to share information with anyone. In exchange for information, he asks to bring him a case with a bribe that was lost during the war between the stalkers and the military. Where exactly that has happened is unknown, but S.T.A.L.K.E.R can turn to the zone veteran and stalker leader, Father Valerian, for help. From a conversation with Father Valerian, it turns out that the commander of the checkpoint on the border, Major Koletsky, sold 2 lone stalkers to bandits in the garbage. And besides, Koletsky organized an attack by bandits on a group of stalkers, the same ones who were bringing a bribe to Sidorovich. As a result, the case went to Major Koletsky. The stalkers on the cordon decided to unite to knock the case out of Koletsky and organized a secret base on the northern farm. Soon, when Major went somewhere in his official car, the stalkers, having organized an ambush, attacked him and took him hostage. Koletsky was put behind bars at the base and began to be interrogated about the case. Major, however, hid the case at one time and refused to reveal where it was. At the same time, a soldier nicknamed the General is on the same side as Koletsky, who, together with his comrade, is preparing an operation to rescue Major. You might think, Doesn't a soldier have anything better to do than rescue some sneaky dude? No, he just owes him a considerable sum of money. In the vastness of the zone, the laws of survival are simple and clear. To prevent the situation from getting out of control, the leader of the stalkers, Father Valerian, contacts other stalkers, Vasily, Goblin, Kosi, and Puzo, with a request to help repel a possible attack by the military. The stalkers eliminate a group of soldiers who have arrived to free Koletsky. Then Major, pressed against the wall, breaks down and is forced to restore business relations with the stalkers and Sidorovich. He gives Father Valerian and S.T.A.L.K.E.R the coordinates of the stolen case. The case is in one of the 3 hiding places. S.T.A.L.K.E.R finds the case and brings it to Sidorovich, who, as promised, tells him the necessary information. They say there is a strange stalker nicknamed Fang who is looking for tube amplifiers and other electronics from him. Apparently, he wants to rip out the copper and sell it. Okay, it's a joke. Sidorovich sells him only 1 amplifier because he doesn't have any more. Then Fang goes with his question to the diggers situated in the garbage zone. S.T.A.L.K.E.R decides to follow him and also goes to the garbage. It turns out that the garbage is run by Yoga's gang, the largest bandit clan in the entire Stalker series. Thanks to his leadership qualities, Yoga turns a number of small bandit gangs into a full-fledged, united group. And the only corner of the garbage that still remains not under their control is the flea market in the north. It is controlled by the diggers. Yoga has settled in the old depot, but his leader, let's be honest, is not very good. He does not value people, and is also greedy, selfish, and cruel. And because of his poorly developed soft skills, Yoga is not respected and despised by many of the bandits. Among them, for example, is Wild Napper, who works as a bartender at the bandit base and is not particularly happy with the prospect of moving up the career ladder within the bandit structure. Wild Napper wants to take Yoga's place and lead the gang.
Any messages?
Yeah, just a fax.
Oh. Damn, this is from corporate. How many times have I told you that there's a special filing cabinet for things from corporate?
You haven't told me.
It's called the waste paper basket.
And like every best boss in the world, Yoga sends all the rebels and those who disagree with him to a concentration camp organized on the territory of the abandoned equipment parking lot. By the way, it is to this concentration camp that Major Koletsky sold the stalkers to the bandits. Bandits constantly raid the diggers, and S.T.A.L.K.E.R can join in on the fun. However, the canonical plot is the victory of the diggers and their capture of the entire territory of the garbage. But let's not rush the events. Walking through the garbage, S.T.A.L.K.E.R finds the bodies of dead diggers, and on the PDA of one of them, he reads a message about parts for Fang. Allegedly, these poor guys were looking for several parts, but found only one, which Fang took away, promising to give the money after receiving all the parts. One of the diggers, nicknamed Vazyan, sets out after Fang, and at that time his comrades are attacked by mutants. S.T.A.L.K.E.R follows the path Vazyan is taking and comes just in time. The digger is attacked by a pack of dogs. The hero helps Vazyan fight back and learns from him that Fang went to the Freedom Base in the Dark Valley. S.T.A.L.K.E.R arrives at the Freedom Base and wants to meet with the group's leader. Commandant Lingov announces that he will not let the mercenary go to Chernobyl. Since the Freedom faction is constantly being attacked, the group has closed the Dark Valley for quarantine and is closely monitoring all entrances to the territory and all its visitors. At the same time, the Commandant promises to put in a word for S.T.A.L.K.E.R if he completes several tasks for the group. During one of the tasks, S.T.A.L.K.E.R hears shooting, and when it subsides, he receives a message from Chekhov, who reports that one of the PDAs is still active and needs to be found. From the recording of the deceased member of the Freedom faction, S.T.A.L.K.E.R learns that Lingov, the Commandant and one of the founders of the Freedom faction, has betrayed his clan and handed himself over to mercenaries who are carrying out orders to destroy the Freedom faction. The Commandant, who is the right-hand man of the group's leader, nicknamed Chekhov, leaks the routes of movement of his own units to the mercenaries. Then S.T.A.L.K.E.R meets personally with Chekhov, who asks him to find the Commandant in exchange for information about Fang. S.T.A.L.K.E.R completes the task and finds out that the mercenaries are behind the attacks. They kill the Commandant when they learn that he has been exposed. Having delivered Lingov's PDA to Chekhov, the Freedom faction leader sheds some light on the situation. According to him, Fang is at the Freedom Base and is interested in rare electronic parts that are only found in army encryption machines. Why does he need them? The latter doesn't want to admit. And Chekhov sells the parts to the Stalker for a decent amount. After that, he asks the technician Uncle Yar to hack the frequency of Fang's PDA in order to monitor his movements for several days, just in case. Chekhov gives S.T.A.L.K.E.R the coordinates, which show that Fang went to the garbage. Continuing the search for Fang, S.T.A.L.K.E.R may join another faction war and help Freedom destroy the mercenaries, since he is no longer a mercenary, but serves the Clear Sky. Following Fang to the garbage, S.T.A.L.K.E.R finds a basement near the flea market, occupied by diggers. Going down into the basement, S.T.A.L.K.E.R accidentally touches a stretcher set up by the bandits. Having stolen all the main character's hard-earned property, or simply put, the bribe, the bandits disappear in an unknown direction. Having come to his senses, S.T.A.L.K.E.R finds Fang's PDA, which had previously fallen into the same trap. S.T.A.L.K.E.R reads a message that just arrived on Fang's PDA from an unknown contact. "Fang, the situation has changed. Someone found out that we were in the center of the zone and opened the hunting season on us. We need to act as quickly as possible. You will find a detailed plan in the hiding place. I changed the code." Presumably, this unknown contact is Fang's comrade nicknamed Ghost, but S.T.A.L.K.E.R has no way of confirming this yet. The hiding place mentioned in the message is located in the dungeons of the Agroprom. Having seized his belongings from the bandits, S.T.A.L.K.E.R went to the Agroprom Research Institute. This territory is controlled by the Duty clan, which is attacked by dozens of mutants every night. Once Duty even wanted to block the side tunnel in the Agroprom dungeons, through which the mutants come from their burrows to the surface. However, after consulting with Michael Bay, the group went too far with the explosives and... Okay, here, and without Michael Bay, part of the walls of the Research Institute collapsed from the explosion. So, trying to block the passage for the mutants, the Duty clan opened it on the contrary, and Snorks and Bloodsuckers climbed to the surface from their holes. Later, the Duty group still blocked the holes, securing themselves for a while, but the mutants began to dig new caves, so they were forced to leave the territory of the Agroprom factory, retreat to the walls of the Research Institute, and turn to the Stalkers for help. S.T.A.L.K.E.R knows that usually those who want to work for the Duty or fight the Bloodsuckers gather within the walls of the factory. Therefore, he comes to General Krylov, who heads the Duty, with a question about how to get into the Agroprom dungeon. Krylov agrees to help S.T.A.L.K.E.R get into the dungeon, but in return asks him to turn off the pumping station that pumps out groundwater, and also to flood the dungeon in order to finally stop the mutants. To do this, S.T.A.L.K.E.R will have to open the water tank gate. Eventually, with the support of the Duty, S.T.A.L.K.E.R gets into the Snorks cave and, fighting off the mutants, opens a gateway in the dungeons of the Agroprom Research Institute. Groundwater begins to flood the dungeons and the entire lower level of the building, but S.T.A.L.K.E.R manages to get to the upper level of the Research Institute, where in fact he finds a hiding place with S.T.A.L.K.E.'s PDA. From this PDA, S.T.A.L.K.E.R learns that S.T.A.L.K.E. is going to go to the center of the zone again, and must hurry, because someone has found out about his plan with Fang. In addition, in the message, the Ghost wrote to S.T.A.L.K.E. that he and Fang managed to collect 2 decryptors that he had hidden in a cache near the Brain Scorcher, and that he plans to pick them up as soon as they go to the center of the zone. By the time S.T.A.L.K.E.R learns of this, there is only 1 decoder in the cache on the outskirts of the Jupiter plant, left there by S.T.A.L.K.E.R. Along with it is a note from Fang, in which the Stalker says that just in case he took the second decoder and hid it in the Politia Hotel in Pripyat. S.T.A.L.K.E.R believed that it was dangerous to go through the catacombs, especially if someone was hunting them. So the Stalkers decided to go through the Brain Scorcher, and to do this, S.T.A.L.K.E.R undertook to go to the Yantar to see Professor Sakharov. According to him, the professor could take a device to protect their brains from Misai radiation. S.T.A.L.K.E.R told Fang and the Ghost to wait for him at the military warehouses. It was at this moment that Lebedev, having learned about the Stalker's plans, contacted S.T.A.L.K.E.R and asked him to intercept S.T.A.L.K.E.R, and the Clear Sky group plans to stop Fang and Ghost alone. Well, not entirely alone. Lebedev orders their mercenaries, and he himself begins preparing the Clear Sky for the journey to the center of the zone. At this time, another war of factions breaks out in the zone. The Duty people are tormenting the freedom fighters, Father Valerian's Stalkers are attacking the bandits' base. And according to the canon, the bandits are defeated. S.T.A.L.K.E.R can also take part in this cheerful celebration of life, but without lingering for long, he goes further to Yantar, where the scientist's bunker is located. Before the super emission, Yantar, namely the dried-up lake and the abandoned plant of the same name, were the edge of the zone. However, due to the large emission, the border of the zone has moved away. S.T.A.L.K.E.R arrives at the bunker on Yantar and sees stalkers who usually accompany scientists when they go to the surface on research expeditions. The stalkers let S.T.A.L.K.E.R in to see Professor Sakharov, and S.T.A.L.K.E.R learns from him that the professor has made a deal with S.T.A.L.K.E.R. He says that he will take an unconfigured prototype of the Psi helmet and go to the factory complex to test it, in exchange for which he will receive a fully configured device. However, according to the professor, he has not seen either the prototype or S.T.A.L.K.E.R since then. Since PSI radiation acts in pulsating waves, it is possible to stay in the factory complex for some time. The professor assumes that S.T.A.L.K.E.R hasn't expected the increasing strength of the PSI radiation and fell under its influence. And therefore, S.T.A.L.K.E.R may also fall under its influence, not expecting it at all, if he still dares to follow S.T.A.L.K.E.R. The only thing that can help S.T.A.L.K.E.R in this situation is the documentation with instructions for controlling the PSI installation cooling system, stored in a PDA that the stalkers found on the factory premises. But when the stalkers leave the territory of Yantar, they fall under the influence of PSI waves and die, so S.T.A.L.K.E.R needs to go to the factory and get a PDA for the professor. When he delivers the PDA to the scientist's bunker, Sakharov sends S.T.A.L.K.E.R to meet with the stalker Lefty, who has gathered a large detachment of experienced stalkers around him. Together, they work for Sakharov, taking measurements, collecting samples for research, and in exchange for this, they provide his group with high-quality medical and financial assistance. Together, S.T.A.L.K.E.R and Lefty's group must break into the factory and restart the cooling system, which we all need so much in the summer. What am I talking about? In fact, this cooling system helps stabilize the psi field. So, while S.T.A.L.K.E.R covers the stalkers from the roof, Lefty and his comrades restart the cooling system valves. Soon after, as a sign of gratitude, Sakharov informs S.T.A.L.K.E.R that S.T.A.L.K.E.R has headed towards the Red Forest. S.T.A.L.K.E.R almost manages to catch up with S.T.A.L.K.E.R, but near the bridge to Limansk, the mercenary is attacked by stalkers bribed by S.T.A.L.K.E.R. S.T.A.L.K.E.R himself manages to disappear into the passage leading to the Red Forest, and while S.T.A.L.K.E.R fights through the stalkers' fire, he blows up the tunnel behind him.
I blew up the tunnel. You will not stop me. I am going to reach the center of the zone, whatever it takes.
How exactly S.T.A.L.K.E.R found out that he was being followed, that an ambush was needed immediately, and that the crossing had to be destroyed is unknown. Meanwhile, S.T.A.L.K.E.R is forced to attack the stalkers who opened fire on him. As soon as S.T.A.L.K.E.R has dealt with the problem, Lebedev contacts him on the radio, and he is upset that S.T.A.L.K.E.R has escaped. He decides to tell the mercenary about Limansk. Going through the ghost town is the last way to catch up with S.T.A.L.K.E.R because the bridge is controlled by the renegades. According to Lebedev, only an old man nicknamed the Forester knows the way to Limansk. Basically, he is really a forester, and before the Chernobyl accident he worked in Limansk. But now you can only get to it by jumping into a spatial anomaly deep in the forest. Fortunately, on the bodies of the killed stalkers, S.T.A.L.K.E.R finds a PDA containing information about the location of this spatial anomaly, and goes to it. At this time, S.T.A.L.K.E.R has come out at the other end of the planted tunnel and has come to the military warehouses where he planned to meet his comrades, Fang and Ghost. The comrades should have arrived at the place before him, so the situation seems suspicious to the stalker. He decides to go to the brain scorcher himself, and with the help of a psi helmet calmly bypasses him. From there, through the vicinity of the Jupiter plant, S.T.A.L.K.E.R heads to the Chernobyl nuclear power plant. In fact, there is nothing surprising in the fact that S.T.A.L.K.E.'s comrades did not come to the agreed place. Clear Sky promised to take care of them. They kept their promise. On the orders of Clear Sky, mercenaries killed Fang when he came to the army warehouses with Ghost. Ghost managed to escape. Having fled, he waited until the noise subsided and then returned to his comrade's body to get his clothes. This is a joke. Of course, Ghost decided to bury Fang properly. Therefore, he buried his body not far from the so-called Village of Bloodsuckers and went to S.T.A.L.K.E.'s hideout, located in the dungeons of Agroprom. Unaware of this, S.T.A.L.K.E.R leaves notes for his comrades in case they show up. The content of the notes somewhat disrupts the logic of events, so we will talk about them in this video a little later. Meanwhile, a group of scientists, C Consciousness, learns that S.T.A.L.K.E.R has managed to get past the brain scorcher and is now heading straight for them, so they decide to use Plan B and launch the Stalker Project, a program for mass encoding agents to destroy S.T.A.L.K.E.R.
I think for this one, I can give you.
At the same time, S.T.A.L.K.E.R finds the Forester and asks how to get to Lymansk. However, during their conversation, a voice comes from the walkie-talkie. S.T.A.L.K.E.R learns about the Forester's group, which is stuck in a spatial anomaly. However, due to poor communication, he only hears fragments of requests for help. The old man sends a mercenary to the army warehouses to establish radio contact with the Stalkers who have gone there for the artifact. Having received a radio signal from the Forester's group at the warehouses, S.T.A.L.K.E.R returns to the Forester and relays the message he heard. The old man learns that the Forester's group of mercenaries has fallen into a spatial bubble, and says that he knows how to help them get out of the anomaly, because he recently fell into one. To do this, you need the compass artifact, but the renegades took it from the old man. It is necessary to return it, use the compass to obtain the coordinates for exiting the bubble, and transmit these coordinates to the Forester's group via a powerful radio transmitter, like the one located at a military base. S.T.A.L.K.E.R returns the artifact to the Forester and heads to the military base. However, due to a large emission, the military has lost control of the barrier, which is now occupied by stalkers, and the military themselves are holed up at the base awaiting evacuation. Alone or with the support of the freedom fighters, S.T.A.L.K.E.R attacks the military base and activates the radio transmitter. The Forester frees a detachment of mercenaries from the anomaly, and they in turn lower the bridge to Lymansk. The Freedom Group sets up their new base in the warehouses, and S.T.A.L.K.E.R, together with the Clear Sky group, sets off for Lymansk. After passing the city, the character enters the dungeons of Pripyat near the old hospital, and through the dungeons goes out to the dragons. Oh, that is, to the Chernobyl nuclear power plant. There he is met by Lebedev and hands him an M1 rifle. S.T.A.L.K.E.R moves through the teleport anomalies in the sarcophagus area, and uses the rifle to destroy S.T.A.L.K.E.'s BSI protection. The same Sakharov device. According to Lebedev, the zone was supposed to stabilize, but instead there's a new powerful super emission.
But this zone was supposed to come down. What's going on? My head's about to explode.
At the time of the release, the C Consciousness members have not yet managed to stop their Stalker program, and, continuing to encode people, make a mistake. S.T.A.L.K.E.R receives the encoding. His memory is erased, and he is programmed to kill S.T.A.L.K.E.R. Soon he regains consciousness with a new tattoo on his forearm, the mark of a C Consciousness agent. S.T.A.L.K.E.R is able to survive the super emission, although it promised to be his last. However, the coding by C Consciousness lasted so long that neither the further fate of the mercenary nor the fate of the Clear Sky group is unknown. Only the plot of Stalker 2 will shed light on S.T.A.L.K.E.R's fate. The coding lasted about 8 months, until April 2012. During this time, the zone underwent significant changes. Due to the super emission, the Clear Sky virtually disappeared, as did the Renegades. Therefore, these factions are not present in Shadows of Chernobyl, and the sky above the zone itself became quite gray. Swamps, Lymansk, and Red Forest again became an area not desirable for visiting due to strong anomalous activity. The group stopped fighting, choosing a policy of neutrality. Well, what happened next we already know. S.T.A.L.K.E.'s further fate is revealed in detail in Stalker, Shadow of Chernobyl. Well, we will look at the in-game mechanics and innovations of Stalker Clear Sky. We will analyze the plot inaccuracies and other problems of the project. Was Clear Sky a good prequel to the successful original? Let's find out. Clear Sky is the same Stalker, not much different from Shadow of Chernobyl, and at first glance the gameplay in Clear Sky is not at all different from the original. Avoid anomalies, fight mutants, escape from emissions, explore the zone and collect artifacts, heal from radiation, and fight for one of the factions. and thanks to the thoughtful narrative and exciting plot, the game gives you the opportunity to look at the story already known to the player from a different perspective. In fact, the developers say, complete quests, and you will discover the truth about how S.T.A.L.K.E.R ended up in the death truck, and where the Stalker tattoo on his arm in Shadow of Chernobyl came from. But if we stopped at the assessment of Clear Sky only at first glance, then the story about the game would be incomplete, and to some extent unfair. After all, in fact, at the time of its prequel release, Stalker became known throughout the world as an atmospheric and mystical shooter with RPG elements in a post-apocalyptic setting. As a scary game about the search for artifacts, creepy mutants, and anomalies of the Chernobyl exclusion zone. And therefore, for most players, it was an unpleasant surprise that Clear Sky moved away from all this in the direction of a killer shooter with faction wars and endless shootouts of the main character with different factions.
There's only one thing a stalker can expect from the
That's not why so many people liked Stalker. Of course, there were also successful decisions by the developers in the game. For example, the wonderful location of the swamp, which frightened the player with its mysticism, silence, and endless field of tall grass behind which an unknown evil could be hiding. You look at a bush and your imagination is already drawing the horns of a bloodsucker on it. Wait a second, a bloodsucker doesn't have horns. Well, you get the idea. This location looks especially interesting in the evening, as, however, other new locations. Both Red Forest and Limansk, and the old but slightly redesigned dungeons look very impressive, thanks to the new engine capabilities. Of the new locations, only the hospital is somewhat unremarkable, and that's because of the gunfights. Anomalies, which have become much less common in the game but much more abundant, also look beautiful at night. At the same time, due to the fact that the engine was reworked and DirectX 10 support was added, a lot of bugs and problems appeared in the game. It would seem that it is simply necessary to fix everything that could not be implemented in Shadow of Chernobyl and not spoil anything. But on release, Clear Sky turned out to be even more buggy and non-working than the original. Pieces of locations disappeared before the player's eyes when entering the building. Of course, to optimize the engine, locations are indeed unloaded from the system's memory, but they should not disappear so noticeably. The new lighting created a strange shadow dome that seemed to stick to the player. Characters froze, twitched in place, or disappeared, and the game crashed like a classic. And all because at the last moment of development, GSC changed priorities and abruptly decided to turn Stalker into a killer shooter with breakthrough graphics. In general, among the innovations of Clear Sky, most of them are focused on action and shootouts. Bleeding has become a more dangerous factor because it does not completely go away on its own and requires the use of a bandage. And since opponents have learned to throw grenades at the player, the developers have made a special warning that there is a grenade nearby. In addition, the static tracks of the first part of the game have been replaced by dynamic music. During the buildup of tension, for example during a shootout, the music changes from melodic to tense, and on the player's handheld device, you can now find all the information about the war between factions, and the places of probable enemies' presence, including mutants, are marked on the map. But no matter how much you want to focus on the beauty of the locations during the game, the constant gunfights ruin the whole atmosphere. Who even came up with faction wars in a guarded closed zone? Where did so many people come from if new people can't get into the zone, and those who are already there are killing each other for no reason on the wasteland fields, even before it became mainstream in arena battles on the duty base? 9 enemy factions participate in faction wars: Freedom, Duty, Stalkers, Bandits, Renegades, Clear Sky, Monolith, Mercenaries, and Military. The player can choose one of the sides and shift the advantage of the faction's forces in a certain direction. After choosing a faction, the player becomes aware of its strength, which has several indicators: resources, the amount of available ammunition, the number of captured points, and the number of free units. It would seem that it is a cool mechanic, but by and large, it did not affect the plot in any way. Therefore, there is no desire to complete any faction quests, go to clear out strongholds, and do similar things. At the same time, the player's actions affected the clan's attitude towards the character. For example, something similar happened in Shadow of Chernobyl, when killing a stalker by the player spoiled relations with them, and saving him with a first aid kit instantly made the character a player's friend. However, in the context of faction wars in Clear Sky, this mechanic made more sense. Also, from the innovations, the main character got the opportunity to improve weapons and armor at the mechanics that are present at the base of each faction. Judging by the gameplay, this mechanic is especially important in the game. Without improvements, the weapon has such low characteristics that it is not suitable for a serious battle. In addition, upgrades are needed to appear, seemingly standard for weapons functions. For example, the ability to attach a submachine gun to the AKM-74/2. Thank goodness that in those years, game studios had not yet come up with donations in the game. Weapons and armor can also be repaired by mechanics and some other characters, for example the Forester in the Red Forest, for a certain price. In addition, in all locations, except for Limansk, the abandoned hospital, and the Chernobyl nuclear power plant, there are guide characters who can instantly guide the character to a certain place for a certain amount. It is worth noting that initially, instead of this mechanic, the developers created the concept of a character nicknamed the Cartographer, a legendary stalker who explores the zone and, according to the plot, helps S.T.A.L.K.E.R get to Limansk. The character was supposed to be in the Cartographer's abode location, but during development, the Cartographer's duties were transferred to the Forester, and the character, as well as his location, never appeared in the game. In general, a lot of things were cut from the game during the development stage. Of the 16 game locations announced at the E3 presentation, where half were completely new, 12 made it to the game. The old locations remained virtually unchanged from Shadow of Chernobyl, and running through them again was quite boring. Among the new locations, the Swamp, Red Forest, Limansk, and Hospital made it to the release. However, the Cartographer's abode, the bridge over Pripyat, generators, and Catacombs 2, a large network of dungeons that was later called the Pripyat dungeons, were cancelled at one stage or another. Generators and the Pripyat dungeons were practically ready. But what is most interesting is that an entire storyline related to these dungeons was cut from the game, which was of great importance in the original plot of Clear Sky. The location was a huge underground city under Pripyat and was supposed to lie between the hospital and the Chernobyl nuclear power plant. Interestingly, while passing through the hospital, the player could even hear the characters mentioning these dungeons over the radio. Based on the design document of the game's early version, the dungeons of Pripyat had a communication system, transport tunnels, laboratories, warehouses, and entire factories hidden underground. At the time of the disaster, thousands of people were underground there, most of whom were scientists and military personnel. Many died, but some of the dungeon's personnel mutated into a special type of mutants, Morlocks. They also remained only in the concept stage. The inhabitants of the catacombs went wild, and therefore it was in this location in the early version of the plot that the player was supposed to meet the same doubles, human copies that became more and more insane with each new release. While passing through this location, the character reached the heart of the dungeons. It was a nuclear reactor, which the doubles and the mutated military immediately took to guard, which led to a terrible shootout. Apparently, already at that stage of the project, the developers decided to bore the player with shooting. At this time, an unknown stalker came to help S.T.A.L.K.E.R. He died in a battle with mutants, and the main character was injured. This begins a cutscene in which Clear Sky scientists come to the reactor and, to their great surprise, notice that the main character and the dead stalker are as similar as 2 drops of water. At that time, one of the scientists says that this is direct confirmation of his theory that the new sphere copies people. With each release, the copies become more feral, which is why at the beginning of the game the Doctor notices changes in the state of S.T.A.L.K.E.R's nervous system. The mercenary himself is a copy, just a later and more successful one. By cutting out the entire plotline with copies from the game, the developers also took away such an important twist for the final game. A plot twist that would explain why S.T.A.L.K.E.R's nervous system is destroyed by the emission. To tell the truth, the changes in S.T.A.L.K.E.R's health status due to emissions are not implemented in the game at all, and basically, do not affect the gameplay at all. Although as an idea, it sounds like a rather interesting game mechanic. Have you noticed that S.T.A.L.K.E.R looks like a character from Tarkovsky's film Stalker? Among the cut content is the 6-barreled machine gun, which was also supposed to be in the game. It can be seen on the screen in the main menu. It is unknown why, But at an early stage of development, the machine gun was removed from the game, leaving only an annoying reminder of it as an image in the menu. And it could have been a good answer to the machine gunner Vova Vist. And let's not forget about the inconsistencies in the plot. For example, before S.T.A.L.K.E.R went to the Chernobyl nuclear power plant on his own, he left 2 notes for his comrades. In the note to Ghost, he informed that he was able to lure the enemy into a trap, so if his comrade catches up with him, they will meet in a place known to both of them. And for now, they say, he went to meet with Fang, who managed to assemble the decoder. However, S.T.A.L.K.E.R was supposed to meet not only with Fang, but with both comrades at the army warehouses. This is mentioned in the previous note from the hiding place at Agroprom. The message to Ghost that Fang assembled the decoder seems even more illogical, because Ghost himself participated in its assembly. The second note generally does not raise any questions. Fang also did not show up for the meeting with S.T.A.L.K.E.R, so the stalker left a note for him too. In the text, he says that he can no longer wait for him, because he already has an entire army of monoliths and sea consciousness agents on his tail, so he is going to the sarcophagus alone. How does he even know this? He is S.T.A.L.K.E.R, not Nostradamus. Given all of the above, it may seem that Stalker Clear Sky is a terrible sequel to the original game, which everyone has been rightfully criticizing for many years. However, we should not forget that the project was developed primarily as an add-on, a regular addition to the original game. Well, the developers wanted to experiment and make a shooter in the setting of Stalker. Well, they did. Did they do it badly? No, it's just not what the fans expected. Moreover, the add-on has a head and shoulders above the graphics and a rather interesting story. Most of the bugs were fixed with patches, and the only serious complaint that can be made to Clear Sky is backtracking. You really have to run between locations a lot, and if the player suddenly decides to take out a bandit base or some other faction in one person, the game will not reward him for this act. The caches will be empty, and there will be no sense in this heroism at all. Only by joining one of the factions in advance could the player raid the enemy faction's base and find some loot. Mostly a bunch of machine guns that would have to be dragged back somewhere for sale, and then receive a reward from the leader of his faction. But running back and forth and doing all this is more expensive for yourself. So if you look at Clear Sky as a large-scale add-on for Shadow of Chernobyl, then the game will show its strengths, from which you can start to enjoy it. The plot of the game is a real drama, written according to all the canons of screenwriting, with a full-fledged antagonist and a motivated main character. As a prequel to Shadow of Chernobyl, the game reveals the events of the Stalker universe quite well. It shows the world of the zone before S.T.A.L.K.E.'s campaign to the Chernobyl nuclear power plant, and how exactly he managed to bypass the brain scorcher. Because in Shadow of Chernobyl, everyone he meets claims that the passage to the center of the zone is closed. In addition, the player could see how the emissions changed the zone and how people lived in it before. The atmosphere in Clear Sky has taken a back seat to the gameplay itself. It has become more dynamic and well thought out than in Shadow of Chernobyl. The original lacked repair and leveling of weapons and costumes. The appearance in the Stalker's zone is also a nice advantage. A different atmosphere and music in bars at faction bases, the stories of the leaders of the same factions, all this was lovingly created by the GSC studio for fans of the Stalker series in the shortest possible time. Clear Sky does not look like a cheap product in an attempt to plug a hole in the development pipeline and cash in on the success and fame of the original game. Clear Sky has something to criticize, but it is not a bad game. It is simply different. This only became apparent over time, when bugs and errors were fixed. But what was the game like at release? How was it received by fans? And what problems did GSC Game World unexpectedly encounter? It's time to go back to the summer of 2008 and look at the release of Stalker Clear Sky. After the announcement that GSC Studio had begun development of a new game in the Stalker series, fans' interest was regularly fueled by various screenshots and videos from the developers. In March 2008, the studio's website announced the planned release date for the Stalker Clear Sky project, namely August 28, 2008. GSC World Publishing and Deep Silver were responsible for the game's release, which were to help with the global release. Serhiy Grigorovich, the executive director of GSC Game World, said, "Our desire to release the game simultaneously worldwide is a challenge for our publisher and at the same time a great responsibility to many fans of the game around the world. We are looking forward to August to bring this ambitious idea to life. By the beginning of the summer, the game was ready, but the developers knew about the huge number of bugs that they still needed to catch and fix. Around this time, in May 2008, from the gaming portal euchregame.net, which is a pirated internet resource where various game files, mods, servers, and discussion forums were published, one user managed to download an unknown archive called Stalker Clear Sky. It weighed about 600 megabytes and was password protected. The archive could have contained anything, because at that time it was very easy to download the beta version of almost any game from pirated websites. But what was really there is not known for certain. That same day, a user went to the fan forum Gaminator and shared information about his catch. In the message, the user contradicted himself, first claiming that he was shocked by the contents of the archive, then literally in the next sentence, claiming that he could not open it because of the password. Many forum users decided that the archive was fake, but the owner of the archive and a few others took it upon themselves to hack it. The next day, the password to the archive was found, and as it turned out, inside was indeed the build of Clear Sky 3120. It was this build that the developers showed in August 2008 in Leipzig at the Games Convention Developers Conference. In addition to this leak, on July 27th of the same year, the company's website was hacked. Someone posted fake news on the website about the game's release being postponed to December. The studio's technical support quickly took over the site and denied the fake statement. Something similar had already happened before the release of Shadow of Chernobyl, so this time the developers actively tried to prevent the game from leaking. However, the leak could not be avoided. Just 2 days later, on July 29th, a forum user with the nickname Me4NII announced that he had received a disc with a pre-release version of Stalker Clear Sky. As proof, he posted screenshots and a short gameplay video from the game on the forum. Users began to ask the tagged questions about the game, how it differed from the original, and he answered these questions with pleasure. In particular, he talked about the many bugs and constant crashes when the character moves to the hospital location. A few days later, the game appeared on torrents in this unfinished form. Having learned about this, GSC decided to release the game not on one day all over the world, as they originally planned, but on different ones. They did not postpone the release earlier, but divided it into 4 weeks from August 22nd for the Commonwealth of Independent States in Ukraine to September 15th for North America. At the release, the developers provided players with a standard, extended, free game edition, as well as collectors and special editions. The standard and extended editions, in fact, differed only in the disc box. The gift edition, besides the disc with the game, contained the book Stalker Collection of Stories in a soft cover. The special edition included a book, a full-color user manual for the game, Stalker Clear Sky, a DVD with bonus materials, a poster with a map of the Chernobyl exclusion zone and art for the game, a poster with a calendar Lymansk 1985, Visit Our Sunny City, dated late 2008, early 2009, a color-changing nightlight, artifact, as well as a bandana with the inscription Stalker Clear Sky, a patch of one of the factions, a metal lighter, an engraved token, and a disc with the game Stalker Shadow of Chernobyl. The collector's edition had essentially everything the same, except for the disc with Shadow of Chernobyl. In addition, they released a separate disc with the game's soundtrack. The music for Clear Sky was composed by Ukrainian composer Oleksiy Omelchuk, and the game also used some of the compositions written by Moose for Shadow of Chernobyl. The soundtrack was initially released on August 22nd as part of a DVD with bonus materials for the game, but was later released on a separate CD. It consisted of dark ambient, industrial, and a minimalist genre known to fans of the series, and the total duration of the soundtrack was 55 minutes. Overall, critics gave the game a favorable review. Most of the negative reviews were focused on the game's balance issues and the infamous faction war. The game was praised for its graphics, as well as its greater image life and player engagement. The British monthly magazine PC Gamer gave the game a high score of 89% out of 100. noting that the prequel was cooler than the first part. But after its release and on sale, the game became the subject of harsh criticism and complaints from thousands of players due to an excess of bugs and crashes. There were so many of them that it was terribly difficult to play and enjoy it at first. For the first month, the developers released patches one after another to fix the bugs. In addition, the system requirements of the game became the subject of players' complaints. The magnificent graphics and effects made considerable demands on computer components. The optimal configuration specified in the documentation was sometimes not enough to obtain a stable frame rate with high picture detail. Players' complaints about low performance even on the most powerful systems negatively affected the game's reputation. Optimization patches for the game were released until the summer of 2009. Unfortunately, it is not known exactly how this affected the game's sales. It is also not known how much the developers earned by releasing a second game, which was prematurely leaked on torrents and was poorly received by users. The only thing the developers were probably happy about was the audience's interest in multiplayer. Because faction war sucked the players' energy, running around old locations was pretty boring back in Shadow of Chernobyl, and the player simply didn't have time to explore new locations due to the fast pace of the game and constant gunfights. Most fans of the series happily started playing the Clear Sky multiplayer. Some servers are still alive today. It was in multiplayer that the entire tactical component of the shooter was revealed, especially in team battles. The locations could finally be viewed and evaluated from all sides. It turned out that they were well detailed and their level design was competently thought out for a variety of battles. Perhaps this is why the game still remains alive even after 15 years. Soon, the head of development at Clear Sky, Anton Bolshakov, left the GSC team and went to develop something of his own. Within a year, he founded a browser game development studio, Happy Star Games. That's where real game development is. You don't have to do Stalker for 7 years. Another development team also got pretty burned out while creating 2 games in a row, but they didn't quit. The global economic crisis was raging outside, and finding a new job wasn't that easy. The team simply went on vacation. And during the vacation, GSC management asked everyone to think about how they saw the second Stalker add-on, which was supposed to be about the city of Pripyat. Talks about creating another sequel to the Stalker series continued throughout the development of the first add-on. In fact, the development of the second add-on, Shadows of Chernobyl, started while the development of the first was still in full swing. On April 2nd, 2008, the team once again went to Pripyat to gather materials for the future game. During the trip, the developers visited the Prometheus movie theater, the Pripyat coffee shop, the hospital, the bookstore, the kindergarten, as well as the then-existing police station, the fire station, a park alley, and various residential buildings. During a meeting with the GSC team, Deputy Technical Director for Nuclear and Radiation Safety at the Chernobyl NPP, Oleksandr Novikov, said about Pripyat that, at first there are no emotions as such, but then, after a week or two, you really want to look at all the photos, remember everything down to the smallest detail, and even later you will start to be drawn to the zone again because, despite all the fears associated with it, it is strikingly beautiful. By the way, it was Oleksandr Novikov who was the real prototype for the image of the game character Novikov in the Stalker add-ons. In May 2008, GSC artists, who had practically no tasks on the Clear Sky project, began drawing elements and locations for Call of Pripyat. While finishing work on Stalker Clear Sky, the team decided to model an entire microdistrict of the city of Pripyat. A fragment of the Earth's surface was created, terrain of rather poor quality, as well as model buildings. Only the laundromat was worked out in detail. The developers stopped there and focused on the release of Clear Sky. In early 2009, the developers came back from vacation and returned to work on the second add-on. In addition, by January, the project team had been replenished with several more employees. Level designer Denis Rutkovsky already had a year and a half of experience in creating 3D graphics and adored science fiction. Working at the Ukrainian game studio Deep Shadows, Denis created high-polygon models of game vehicles and weapons, drew concepts, and was engaged in texturing, and in the midst of the global crisis, he decided to change companies. Rutkowski recalls, "I got a job at GSC in the midst of the 2009 crisis. I sent my resume and received a response a few days later. The interview went quickly and well, and I was offered the job the same day." Having got a job at GSC Game World, Dennis got into the development team of Stalker Call of Pripyat as a 3D graphics artist. It was he who modeled the port cranes, part of the Jupiter plant, the Prometheus cinema, a music school, a cement plant, a department store for the project, and also optimized the scenes for the game engine. In addition, Rutkowski textured a lot of scenes. And in August 2009, he left the company to get a job at Crytek Kiev. Most likely, the developer's ambitions did not allow him to sit in one place, so in the future, he would change more than one company in a similar way. The second new employee who joined GSC was graphics programmer Mikhailo Parfenyuk. He also already had experience working as a programmer. However, having read about GSC Game World in a gaming magazine while still at university, he decided to submit his CV to the company. Therefore, in June 2008, Mikhailo passed 2 interviews at GSC, and in July he was approved as a graphics programmer in Stalker Clear Sky, mostly fixing bugs. In addition, Parfenyuk worked on its port to the Xbox 360 console, but due to difficulties that arose in the process, the port was never released. After the Clear Sky release, until January 2009, Mikhailo was engaged in creating various patches for the game. Another newcomer to the company, Armen Abroyan, helped him in this. Armen was originally from Yerevan, Armenia, and was looking for a job abroad for the first time. He was interviewed by Dmitro Yasenev, the lead programmer responsible for A-Life. Following the interview in January 2009, Armen was hired as a senior graphics programmer. In one of the interviews, he recalls, "Once in the GSC office, Misha, Mikhailo Parfenyuk, and I were discussing business, and he spoke only Ukrainian, even with me, and I didn't know Ukrainian. Then Kostya, Konstantin Slipchenko, noticed and asked in surprise, 'Do you understand Ukrainian?' I replied, 'I guess so.' The language barrier didn't bother us." According to Armen, he was the one who managed to fix a well-known 5-year-old bug that had existed since the days of Shadow of Chernobyl. The bug was related to rain. From time to time, the rain turned into some kind of translucent triangles flying from the sky. Generations of graphics programmers tried to fix this bug before Armen, but only he succeeded. So, in January, the whole team started working on Stalker Call of Pripyat. Mikhailo Parfenyuk initially dealt with graphics programming. However, around the middle of the year, together with Holger Gruen from AMD, who was involved in support from the partner company and helped implement marketing technologies, he began working on implementing a new renderer into the project, DirectX 11. On April 7, 2009, an online conference was held with the CEO of GSC Game World, Serhiy Grigorovich, during which Grigorovich spoke about the work on the second add-on to the original Stalker Shadow of Chernobyl. But most interestingly, he also mentioned a full-fledged second part of the game. The second add-on for Stalker will be released this fall. As always, there are a lot of ideas, but only a few will survive to development. We don't share any thoughts until we decide to develop the project. And this is the stage when there is already something to look at. However, I can say that we will definitely develop Stalker 2. Well, obviously the words about the second part in 2009 were remembered by many and resonated for a very long time. Although, unlike the third episode of Half-Life 2, or the full-fledged third part of Gordon Freeman's adventures, this story still has a quick end in sight, dated 2024. So, it turns out, Serhiy did not waste words. Well, we have a separate video on our channel about the adventures of Gordon Freeman and the history of the creation of the legendary Half-Life. We recommend watching it while we are preparing a sequel dedicated to the cult Half-Life 2. The link to the video is in the upper right corner of the screen. However, let's not rush things and talk in more detail about the second add-on for Stalker. After all, it was then, at the conference on April 7th, Serhiy Grigorovich first announced the official name of the add-on, Call of Pripyat. At first, not everyone liked it. More precisely, the question was raised by the English version of the name, which literally resembled the name of the famous series of military shooters Call of Duty. But, after consulting with native English speakers, they realized that the construction itself, Call of, is a fairly common phenomenon, and there is no need to worry about its use. Just in 3 weeks, on April 30th, GSC Game World officially announced the game on its website, revealing many of its details and features, including the main plot. As it turned out, the main task facing the developers when creating Call of Pripyat was to fix all the mistakes they made in the first add-on. That is, everything that Clear Sky was so criticized for. And no, this was not a repeat of the situation after the release of the first part. The developers had to not just fix bugs and not spoil anything, they actually had to create a different game. Different from Clear Sky. After collecting audience feedback on Clear Sky, the team presented it for general discussion, and concluded that the continuation of the series should be based on Shadow of Chernobyl. After all, it was there that the level of atmosphere, danger, and unpredictability of the zone was set. Compared to the first add-on, in the second add-on, the gameplay mainly consists of completing various tasks such as finding items, studying, and exploring the territory. Moreover, you don't go there, find out something, and tell someone to advance in the quest. But go and investigate and draw conclusions yourself. Shootouts are mandatory only in some story tasks. The plot of Call of Pripyat was worked on by a team of Ruslan Didenko, Petro Dushinsky, and Andriy Verpakovsky, who was already the lead game designer. After the release of the add-on Clear Sky, Anton Bolshakov, the head of previous projects, left the company, so Ruslan was promoted to the head of development of Stalker Call of Pripyat. He was responsible for the game concept, task completion deadlines, and drew up design documents. Petro Dushinsky assisted him in the latter. Petro worked on design documents back in Clear Sky, but it was in the second add-on that he was able to implement most of his best ideas. Dushinsky's main task was the design of plot and side missions, as well as writing text and dialogues. According to him, Call of Pripyat is his favorite project. It was really interesting, working out the connections between different events, creating branched lines of tasks that intersected with each other. I tried to create characters in accordance with the atmosphere, ambiguous with their own history and secrets. By the way, since we got to the game plot, logical questions arise. What was Stalker Call of Pripyat about? What plot did the developers offer fans? And who does the ghost town of Pripyat ultimately call? After Strelok's successful campaign to the center of the zone and the destruction of the sea consciousness, he lays down to rest on a green meadow. Enjoying the sky that was once again clear of clouds, the Stalker sets off in an unknown direction. Later, he realizes that nothing has changed in the zone from his feet. It still exists, and the energy of the new sphere is now pouring uncontrollably onto Earth. The emissions have become more frequent and occur regularly every day. Because of this, anomalies block the road to Pripyat, and in some areas of the zone, on the contrary, PSI radiation weakens. Due to the shutdown of the STAI devices, some monolith units, including the Wanderer unit, began to escape from general control and began to think independently. Other monolith representatives began to build antennas from garbage in order to continue receiving instructions from unknown STAI devices. The Freedom faction reached the Yanov station, where they decided to set up a new base. However, they were soon joined by the Duty faction, led by Lieutenant Colonel Lefty. They also wanted to set up a base at Yanov. A conflict arose between them, but during the clarification of relations, one of the Duty faction members, nicknamed Zulu, felt the approaching emission and the conflict stopped. Both groups hit at the station and decided to make it a neutral territory, and a truce was declared between Duty and Freedom factions. However, only at the station. And outside of Yanov, Duty and Freedom were still bitter enemies. The Stalkers who survived the emission went to the center of the zone. Some of them also settled in neutral territory, the Yanov station, but most settled on the half-destroyed dry cargo ship Skadovsk. Among them are Nimble and Cardin, who trade in weapons, armor, and their modifications. By the way, Cardin once worked as an engineer in the testing shop, testing a prototype of a Gauss gun. And after the factory was closed, he and his friends went to the center of the zone. His friends were unable to reach Skadovsk. Since then, the engineer began to drown his sorrows in a bottle. Now you rarely see him sober. Bandits under the command of Sultan also came to the center of the zone. Well, where there are people, there is trickery. The bandits maintain neutrality with the Stalkers on the Skadovsk, but outside the ship they are all eager for power and robbery. Several bandit groups remain on the outskirts of the Jupiter, not far from the scientist's bunker. Where Clear Sky is now is unknown, but the group technician Novikov joined the scientists in a bunker on the outskirts of the Jupiter, and now works as a technician for them. The head of the bunker is Professor Herman, who previously worked in Sakharov's laboratory, and later, together with Professor Ozersky, he was sent to the outskirts of the Jupiter on an expedition to study the local flora and fauna of the zone. Some stalkers, in exchange for a roof over their heads, took up the search for artifacts for the scientists. And since the scientists had no protection, Herman agreed to cooperate with the mercenaries. Soon, Western countries became interested in the zone and sent a reconnaissance drone to the Chernobyl NPP. The locals mistook it for a UFO. However, upon entering the zone, the drone crashed. It is from this moment that the main plot of the Call of Pripyat starts, and everything interesting begins in the zone.
It's time to have some fun with Uncle Samsonite.
After the Brain Scorcher was shut down in the summer of 2012, the National Security and Defense Council of Ukraine launched an operation codenamed Fairway to take control of the Chernobyl nuclear power plant and clarify the situation. They created a map of anomalies to ensure the operation was successful and sent Mi-24 helicopters with troops on board to Zone 5. However, despite impeccable preparation, the operation ended in failure. Contact with the helicopters was lost and none of them returned to base. At the same time, an unknown client hired mercenaries to destroy all documents in the X8 laboratory in Pripyat. The mercenary commander, nicknamed the Jackal, was supposed to meet the client's people, Serbin's group, near a dormitory in Pripyat. Serbin was supposed to show them the entrance to the laboratory and hand over a key card for access inside. Chorny, the commander of one of the mercenary groups, was sent to search for any information about the X8 laboratory at the Jupiter plant. And in order not to arouse suspicion, the group, thanks to a person from the Research Institute, hired themselves as guards in the scientist's bunker. In addition to searching for documents, their task was to ensure that no information about the operation of objects with the index X got to the scientific expedition. In order to find out what is really going on in this zone, an experienced stalker, a security service of Ukraine employee, Major Degtyarev, was sent on a mission. He is the main character of this story, and like a true stalker, Major Degtyarev begins to wander the so-called Zaton in the vicinity of the Jupiter plant in search of helicopters that have crashed. Since he comes from Pripyat, he has an innate resistance to PSI radiation. And I wonder how the developers imagined a crash involving these helicopters. They are intact, as if they had made a soft landing, and not crashed. Anyway, after examining several helicopters, the character finds out that the electronics in some of them have completely burned out. In addition, in a helicopter with the call sign Stingray 3, the path to which lies through a spatial anomaly, Degtyarev manages to find a map with possible evacuation points in case of mission failure. Having entered the information into the PDA, Major sets out to investigate the evacuation points. The first point leads Major to the dry cargo ship, Skadovsk. After talking with the locals, he does not learn any useful information and goes to the second point, an abandoned military base. It is not far from the Jupiter plant and the scientist's bunker, and the pilot of one of the helicopters, Lieutenant Sokolov, was able to reach it. He was the only one who survived the accident. In fact, he waited for evacuation for 2 weeks until a stalker took him to the scientist's bunker, and Sokolov refused to talk about Operation Fairway. As a result of searching the helicopter that crashed on the Jupiter, Degtyarev finds a black box. Dear experts, a certain Serhiy from Kyiv is asking you. Attention to the question. What's in the black box? Lone Stalker Nitro, who works as a technician at the Yanov station and is fond of radio engineering, helps Degtyarev decipher the data from the black box of the helicopter with the call sign Stingray 1. The box contained a flight recorder, from which it became known that the commander of the Stingray group, Colonel Kowalski, was trying to contact Stingray 4, in which Sokolov was flying. However, due to a burnout of the electronics, the helicopter's radio did not work and contact couldn't be made. Then Colonel Kowalski addressed all the boards and reported that in an emergency, the evacuation point would be Point B-28. Apparently, that's where the military who survived the disaster went. And where do you think Point B-28 is located? That's right, in Pripyat near the Prometheus movie theater. None of the locals know how to get to this Pripyat. After talking to all the guides, Major couldn't find a single stalker who could take him there. unless the guide pilot, who helped get from Skadovsk to Yanov, advised Degtyarev to dig up information about the secret path under the Jupiter. After all, Pilot's friend once worked on the Jupiter and told him about the underground tunnels. Degtyarev searched the plant and found documents that confirmed what he had heard. Based on the documentation, there is an underground overpass from the Jupiter plant to Pripyat, which can be accessed using a generator, but the overpass is filled with gas and is very dangerous because of the snorks that live there. Nitro tells Major that he can revive the generator, and so he's brought Degtyarev and Zulu to prepare the squad for the journey through the overpass. Major needs to find protective suits with a closed breathing system for himself and the squad so as not to inhale the gas and fall into an eternal sleep underground. Degtyarev can offer to Vano, Strider, and Sokolov to go to Pripyat if he can help them solve their problems. Having gathered a fully equipped team, Degtyarev sets off for the Jupiter. There, Nitro turns on the emergency power generator so that the group can use the elevator that leads to the Pripyat 1 overpass. The tunnel is blocked in places, so the group has to take a detour, where they are constantly attacked by snorks and fully armed monoliths. Somehow, Degtyarev and his companions manage to reach the eastern district of Pripyat, where they are met on the surface by the military. The military asks Degtyarev something like, "Who will you be?" He shows his badge and says that he has information for Kowalski. Zulu decides that he has no business with the military and the security service of Ukraine, so he goes for a walk in Pripyat himself. The military leads the rest of the group to the laundromat. Degtyarev enters Kowalski's office and begins to question him about the failure of Operation Fairway. According to the colonel, the operation went wrong and most of the team perished along with the helicopters. There is still no communication with the center. Kowalski assumes that the helicopters were shot down by some powerful weapon with great penetrating power, a sample of which he is eager to obtain for study. Moreover, according to him, it was this type of weapon that the monoliths used on his people during the first assault on the Chernobyl nuclear power plant. And now Kowalski has tracked down a detachment of monoliths with such weapons in their hands and asks Major to help capture this barrel. In any case, they can only wait for the evacuation, and when it will happen is unclear, because there are several possible dates. And it is not a fact that the next batch of helicopters will even reach them. In the end, Degtyarev and a detachment of soldiers organize an ambush on the monoliths in the hospital. At this point, it turns out that the ambush on the soldiers was actually carried out by the monoliths, who were not happy that the soldiers had previously kicked them out of the laundromat. The monoliths sacrificed 2 of their men, in every sense, to lure the soldiers into the open area. But this did not help them. The detachment, together with Major Degtyarev, gives the fanatics a worthy fight and kills everyone. After that, the Major selects the necessary weapon, the so-called Item 62.
Обхожу противника! Прикройте!
But there is a catch. After the battle, it turned out that the weapon had broken from falling from the roof. In addition, after returning to the base, one of the soldiers, Captain Tarasov, suggested that since Monolith had ambushed them, it meant that someone was leaking information to them. At the same time, other people began to approach Pripyat. The lone stalker Gary tries to escape from the mercenaries of the Jackal faction, and they, in turn, follow him. On the way to Pripyat, the mercenaries discuss a meeting in the city with the customer's people. When Kowalski was told about the broken weapon, he advised Degtyarev to contact the technicians. At that very moment, a reconnaissance group tries to contact the colonel, but only incomprehensible shouts are heard from the receiver, and a little later the connection is completely lost. Kowalski asks Degtyarev to go find out what happened to the reconnaissance group there. Major finds out that someone attacked and shot a reconnaissance group that had information about the monolith concentration near the bookstore. So all suspicion falls on the monolith people. Kowalski says to check the point near the bookstore and sends Vano and Sokolov to help Major. Entering the building, Degtyarev and his comrades discover the monoliths worshipping a makeshift altar made from a pile of garbage. They do not react to Degtyarev's group and seem to be under the complete control of some unknown force. Then Kowalski decides to send one of the soldiers to grocery store to keep an eye on the monoliths. And Degtyarev, in search of a way to fix the monolith's broken weapons, went to Zatin to see the mechanic Kardan. What he saw made Kardan almost drunk, although in fact he never dries up. Coming to his senses a day or two later, Cardin told Degtyarev what kind of powerful weapon he had brought him. Item 62 actually turns out to be a Gauss rifle, and Cardin had developed one at the Jupiter plant a long time ago. According to him, the weapon's battery power system was damaged, but Cardin cannot repair the Gauss rifle so easily, because when the creation of this weapon continued, he no longer worked on it. He needs a special circuit from the Jupiter test shop. He gives Major his old key card from the shop under the plant, and Degtyarev sets off in search of the circuit. In the workshop, Degtyarev finds documents describing the technical characteristics and principle of operation of the Gauss rifle. But, in addition, the documents mention a certain laboratory X8 in Pripyat, which may contain information about secret experiments in the zone. Finally, among all the documents, there is a note authored by Lebedev, according to which the documents must be returned to the central laboratory, X8, located in the Yubileny Service Center. There's even a keycard for access attached inside. Oh, and for some reason there's no desire to go there. Degtyarev returns to Zayton and hands over the necessary documentation to Cardin. In a few hours, Cardin repairs Degtyarev's Gauss rifle, returns the barrel to him along with the documents, and assures him that he is quitting drinking. I wonder, water too? Degtyarev returns to Pripyat, and a worried Kowalski informs him that the connection with the guard at the grocery store has been lost. Major is forced to help the colonel again and sets out to find the cause of the circumstances that have occurred. On the spot, it turns out that the guard soldier fell under the influence of the bloodsucker and, not controlling his body, shot himself in the head. Who knows, maybe the reconnaissance group died before that, not at the hands of the monolith, but at the paws of the bloodsucker. On the way back to the base, Degtyarev hears gunfire near the school. It is Zulu fighting off a pack of snorks on his own. Major helps deal with the mutants, and as a token of gratitude, the debtor gives Degtyarev a powerful RP-74 machine gun, not a six-barreled one, of course, but, according to Zulu, the most reliable in the zone. Together, they return to the laundromat, where Degtyarev goes to report to Colonel Kowalski about the Gauss rifle. During the conversation, it turns out that this weapon is indeed powerful enough to shoot down helicopters, but, as is known, the electronics of the two helicopters that crashed failed. So, the Gauss rifle had nothing to do with it. So was it worth running around so much, looking for some drawings, repairing this weapon, if it was immediately obvious that it was not the case? In short, whatever. Major told Kowalski about the mercenaries who had arrived in Pripyat. But here too, it turned out that the colonel already knew about them. He is monitoring the Jackal group and suggests that Degtyarev join in its liquidation. In the end, Degtyarev kills the leader of the mercenaries, the Jackal, and Serbin is the man who ordered it. Later, having entered the department store, Major plans to go down to the basement, but the elevator is not working. He finds the body of a mercenary nicknamed Barchuk, who was subordinate to Serbin. His PDA contains information about an emergency generator on the 6th floor. Degtyarev goes up and activates it, after which he takes the elevator down to a secret laboratory. Inside, he finds documents that contain the truth about the activities of C consciousness, and a photo of a mustachioed Bruce Willis. Okay, a photo of Professor Lebedev, only in his youth. After returning to the laundromat, Kowalski informs Major that someone is jamming the city's communications, and it's up to Major Degtyarev to find the jammer again. It's supposedly located in the area of the kindergarten, and before that, the colonel had already sent soldiers there with explosives, but they disappeared. Major goes there, and on the way to the checkpoint he discovers their bodies. One of the soldiers literally blew himself up. Well, at least he didn't use the explosives. And in general, how did it not detonate? Degtyarev picks up the explosives and goes to the kindergarten. I hope YouTube doesn't ban us for this. After blowing up the front door, Major gets inside and there is strong PSI radiation, which is produced by a man-made antenna made of garbage and a PSI emitter. Presumably, this psi installation was created by the monoliths. After turning it off, Major begins to hear a sound from the floor below, a knock coming from a closed refrigerator. Degtyarev goes down to the sound, opens the refrigerator, and sees a military medic, Lieutenant Rogovets, locked inside. He admits that he does not remember how he ended up there, but that he was supposedly locked from the outside.
Hey, is your refrigerator running?
Yes, it is. Are your doors unlocked?
What? Why? I don't know, they all kind of look the same.
What do you mean they all look the same?
Degtyarev helped the medic return to the base, while Gary and Vano set off for supplies on the Jupiter. The chief of staff finally gets in touch with Kowalski and listens attentively to the colonel. Kowalski reports to him about the situation, and the chief, presumably scratching the back of his head, gives the order to consolidate in the positions already occupied. The evacuation will have to wait a long time. At this moment, Lieutenant Kirilov bursts into the room, reporting that he's managed to detect a strange signal not far from the base. This signal appears and disappears, but it doesn't stay in place. Degtyarev goes out to check if the local providers have installed a 5G tower under his window, and finds out that the signal is coming from underground. Degtyarev assumes that an attack might be prepared on the military, and returns to the base. However, the de facto truth is much more interesting. The source of the signal is S.T.A.L.K.E.R, who is moving through the catacombs in Pripyat for some unknown reason. The Stalker wants to see the military chief, to give him information that can help control and destroy the zone. However, unexpectedly for everyone, the emission begins, so in order to talk, everyone has to hide deep in the building. Degtyarev tells the Stalker about the helicopters that fell, to which he's found an explanation. It's all about the anomaly in the air. Due to the emissions, their location is constantly changing, and the maps of the anomalous fields that the military has have long been outdated. Actually, this is why the helicopters got into the anomaly. If the military wants to get out of the city, it is necessary to scan the area immediately after the emission and remark the location of the anomalies on the map. After the emission, Lieutenant Kirilov contacts the command center, and Degtyarev is appointed head of Operation Fairway. The headquarters claims that there will be enough time before the next emission to carry out an evacuation, so Degtyarev and S.T.A.L.K.E.R will be picked up by helicopters at point B-28. Degtyarev tells the colonel to gather the military and go to the evacuation point. However, at the noise of the helicopters approaching the center of the zone, everyone who is not too lazy begins to climb to the surface. Mutants, zombified, and monoliths have become more active. Helicopters arrive, but they warn that they would immediately fly away if attacked. Near the school, the soldiers fall into a psi field formed by the remains of an energy entity called the Horror of Pripyat. Presumably, it is this entity who sends signals to the monoliths and takes control of the soldiers' consciousness. Lieutenant Rogovets, a medic major rescued from the refrigerator, loses touch with reality again and falls to the ground. Having brought him to his senses, Degtyarev goes further to the Prometheus movie theater, where as a result, a group of soldiers can evacuate by helicopter. Of course, Major Degtyarev could stay to finish the work in the zone and evacuate later with Gary's help. But for this investigation alone, Degtyarev was promoted to colonel. In addition, he was offered a staff position in the security service of Ukraine, which he refused, preferring to be a SSU observer in the zone. Materials and documentation about secret laboratories were removed from military archives and marked as especially important. Security service employees were ordered to prevent the dissemination of information about the work and experiments being carried out in the zone. In addition, documentation with drawings of the Item 62 was used to create several test weapons, and after the tests, Item 62 mass production was abandoned due to the unprofitable cost of ammunition. However, there are rumors that the production of this weapon is secretly continuing. This concludes the plot of the second add-on to Stalker, Shadow of Chernobyl. This ending is considered canonical, but it may differ slightly depending on the player's decisions and actions during the passage. Did Kowalski and Vano survive? What was the fate of Skadovsk and Yanov? Interestingly, if S.T.A.L.K.E.R survives at the end of the game, then in the future he becomes the chief scientific consultant at the Scientific Research Institute of the Chernobyl Anomaly Zone, and if he dies, then all his knowledge will simply be lost. This is the simple, undramatically twisted, yet interesting plot that the developers of Stalker Call of Pripyat came up with. Of course, due to the fact that there is no high pace, endless shootouts, and at the same time there is complete freedom of action, the zone has become somewhat larger. However, did the developers manage to saturate it with diverse gameplay? Did they manage to make the gameplay better than in Clear Sky and Shadow of Chernobyl? We will talk about this now. The plot format in the second add-on is quite different from both the format of Shadow of Chernobyl and the format of Clear Sky. If in the previous ones the developers made a full-fledged dramatic novel, then in Call of Pripyat, everything comes down to one military mission, which for some reason did not go according to plan. Helicopters were flying and they crashed. Why did they crash? Who knows? Are the military missing? In Pripyat, we find them and fly away.
Good morning, Vietnam!
It seems that even at a measured pace, the game can be completed in a few hours. However, you want to complete Call of Pripyat in 20 hours. After all, it has never been so pleasant to walk around the zone and complete side quests in Stalker. This is the most real RPG that the developers could have made. According to users, this is exactly what everyone expected to see in Stalker: Shadow of Chernobyl. And apparently, this is how the developers wanted to make it right away. This time, the developers decided to focus not on technological aspects and updated graphics, but on the internal feeling of the game and the atmosphere. The graphics in Call of Pripyat have not improved a bit. They have even regressed a bit. Instead, the developers have finalized support for DirectX 11 and made good optimizations in the game, thereby minimizing bugs and problems on users' devices. The developers didn't even draw the opening screen this time, but presented it as voiceover shots that replace each other. And thanks to this, the player is told quite consistently and clearly about the events that took place earlier in the zone, sometimes immersing in lore and preparing for the events of Call of Pripyat. This time, the player doesn't have any questions about who his main character is and where he came from, as was the case with Scar. The player knows why he is special, because he is not affected by PSI radiation. The gameplay has changed a lot. The player finally moves not along quest routes from location to location, but in general, in any direction of the open world, like in classic RPGs. The A-Life system has been significantly supplemented. The world lives its own life. Characters go on raids, hunt mutants, and mutants hunt them. NPCs look for artifacts, stop for rest stops, return to camps at night, and during the full-fledged mission added to the game, which is a frequent occurrence, they flee to shelter. The player is sometimes offered more than one or two options for completing a task, and the decisions he makes affect the game ending. Weapons and armor can be improved and leveled. You can choose one favorite weapon and run with it throughout the game. Except that there is no leveling of character characteristics in Stalker like in other RPGs. The variety of tasks in the game has also improved. There are even interesting quests where the player doesn't actually have to do anything except watch the resolution. For example, in one task, Degtyarev investigates the disappearance of stalkers, in which a pack of bloodsuckers is suspected. He goes down into the dungeon where he finds a lair with a fairly large concentration of bloodsuckers. Start shooting and you won't get out of there alive. The bartender Beard on Skadovsk tells Major that the best option is to poison the monsters in the lair with gas. To do this, you need to go to the gas cylinder to the convoy that is carrying gas on the Preobrazhensky Bridge, which leads to the waste processing station. You come to the lair with a gas cylinder, insert it in the right place, poison it, the bloodsuckers are defeated. However, Degtyarev did not find the missing stalkers in their lair, and it soon turned out that the stalkers were killed by the local Dr. Tremor, who required constant blood transfusions because he had hemoglobin dependence. Having told Major about his problem, he decides that life is not easy and takes his own life. However, the player can complete this quest in an alternative way. Simply collapse into the lair in full gear with powerful weapons and kill everyone. However, both solutions have their consequences. If you complete the task in the standard way, then as a result, this room will be filled with poisonous gas, which will make it inaccessible to hide from the emission. And if you break into the lair and kill everyone, then in the future, in case of a mission, the player will have a good and safe shelter. The usual quest tasks do not suffocate the player either. They do not drive them anywhere and do not rush them. Yes, you need to examine the places where the helicopters have crashed. But when the player does it, and in what order is not particularly important, because it does not affect the gameplay. You cannot examine them at all, but simply wander around Zatin, attack bandits, examine the location, and complete side quests. Moreover, even the most primitive at first glance side quests in the spirit of go and find a wonderful artifact can become a real adventure for the player with an unexpected ending. After all, the same quest to find an artifact can be taken by NPC stalkers, find the artifact before the player, and sell it to some bartender. And then the player will only have to buy it from the merchant for a considerable amount. But even in the player's hideout, someone can get into it and steal something valuable, and the player will have to abandon the plot task and go look for the crook who stole something important from him. In this way, the developers motivate the player to constantly think, not like before the dull passage of the main task, which clearly tells where to go and what to do, but real human thinking. Be attentive to the surroundings, look for detours, ask locals, and think about cause and effect relationships. The game introduced a unique achievement system. By making certain choices while completing a task or achieving certain successes in non-story activities such as finding artifacts, the player earns achievements. Many achievements directly affect the player's reputation. Merchants, doctors, and scientists provide their services at different prices. Of course, this also affected the final outcome of the game, where 3 development options were implemented for almost every event. However, these were not all the innovations. The game finally added the ability to sleep, thanks to which the player could skip the night, during which some mutants go hunting, or use it to simply kill time between quests. The artificial intelligence of mutants was significantly redesigned. Now blind dogs, boars, flesh, pseudo-dogs attack in groups from a dispersal, without stopping near the player. Also added to the game are S.T.A.L.K.E.R and Chimera, mutants that were developed during the creation of Stalker, Oblivion Lost and Shadow of Chernobyl, but were cut back then. Each of them has had their behavior worked out in detail, their models and textures have been virtually remade, and their capabilities have been rethought. Chimera is one of the rarest and most dangerous mutants in the zone. Rumor has it that Chimera is the strongest mutant in the zone, the result of genetic experiments under the Universal Animal Protector Program. The monster has a large muscular body with powerful paws and 2 heads, one of which is underdeveloped. The hind limbs are especially powerful, thanks to which Chimera makes long jumps towards the victim at its head level. And the paws have quite sharp claws, which are the mutant's main weapon. Chimera is immune to some anomalies, radiation, and also has high intelligence compared to other mutants. The duplicated system of internal organs and an additional brain, presumably the mutant's second head serves as a backup brain, make the process of its destruction quite problematic, especially due to accelerated regeneration. Another thing is S.T.A.L.K.E.R, a dwarf mutant with telekinetic abilities. S.T.A.L.K.E.Rs are the result of genetic experiments on the development of telekinetic abilities in humans, which were carried out by special services on criminals. In appearance, they are fat, short freaks with hypertrophied facial features, dressed in worn-out black cloaks. The mutant is quite unpleasant not only in appearance, but also in the process of playing. He can lift heavy objects into the air with just the power of thought, and throw them at enemies. He can create invisible force barriers, or a telekinetic explosion that easily scatters objects and people in different directions. S.T.A.L.K.E.Rs can also knock weapons out of the enemy's hands or take them to play with, and they protect themselves from bullets and grenades with a gravitational field. S.T.A.L.K.E.Rs are devoid of human morality and compassion, and kill people for fun and food, using a variety of tricks from their supernatural arsenal. They have remnants of intelligence as they can speak, but their speech is incomprehensible and more like grunts. I wonder what S.T.A.L.K.E.Rs are saying. You can write your version in the comments below this video. In general, the developers did a tremendous job on the characters. Now, most of the game characters have unique faces that were modeled after real people, mostly from the developers of GSC. At the same time, the game has only one visual for each costume, for each faction, unlike those in Shadow of Chernobyl and Clear Sky. Another serious, and for many users critical change in the second game's add-on, was the lack of the ability to drag corpses. Of course, the noise and player visibility sensors necessary for playing the game in stealth mode were not removed from the game interface. The sensors were harmoniously placed around the radar, but the ability to drag corpses appealed to many not for the stealth mode of the game, but for the ability to drag a sack with loot. After all, The characters' bodies had an infinite supply of portable weight, while the game character could take about 100 pounds with him. Well, that's more of an advantage than a disadvantage. After all, carrying bodies with bribes weighing several hundred pounds was a bug that became a feature of the original Stalker. And by cutting out this feature, the developers made the gameplay more realistic. The locations in the second add-on for Stalker were significantly fewer than in Shadow of Chernobyl, and even fewer than in Clear Sky. There were only 5 of them, one of which was a reworked Pripyat, and one was the underground X8 laboratory located in Pripyat. The game also included the locations of Z.A.L.K.E.R, the area around Jupiter, and Pripyat 1 underpass. Z.A.L.K.E.R is a valley with a dry bed of the Pripyat River, where broken boats, launches, barges, and the dry cargo ships Skadovsk and Shevchenko have settled. Z.A.L.K.E.R is very large, and in addition to 2 dry cargo ships, it houses Noah's old barge, and next to Noah's Ark is the parking lot. Also on Z.A.L.K.E.R is an abandoned gas station with a bunch of mutants, the Fault and the Dangerous Cave, the waste processing station and the former substation workshops, known as the Iron Forest. Below them is a secret testing workshop. To the west of the Z.A.L.K.E.R is an area called Swamp, and there is also Krug Antenna Complex. And also on Z.A.L.K.E.R location are the Camp Izumrudnoye aka Emerald, the Preobrazhensky Bridge, which is full of non-working equipment, the dredge station, the burnt farmstead anomaly, the flat hill of the southern plateau, the dock cranes, the sawmill, waste processing station, dangerous cave, and much more. And this is all just Z.A.L.K.E.R. The surroundings of the Jupiter plant in Pripyat contain just as many interesting locations. For example, among the sub-locations of Jupiter are the plant itself, Yanov Station, Old Cooling Tower, Plavny Anomaly, Cement Plant, Scientist's Bunker, Abandoned Volkov Anti-Aircraft Missile Complex, Ash Heap Anomaly, Container Warehouse, Checkpoint, Destroyed Kapachi Village, Parking Lot, Crashed Drone, Quarry, Ventilation Complex, Helipads, Semi-Station, and Eastern Tunnel. But what is most surprising is how much Pripyat has changed. In fact, it is now a full-fledged city, which has the hotel, the laundromat, the hospital, the school, and the kindergarten, the old service center, which was replaced by the Yubilini Service Center, the Prometheus Movie Theater, the bookstore, the grocery store, apartment complex, the river port, the department store, as well as the volcano and vine anomalous activity sites. As a result, the size of the locations and the overall size of the map became significantly larger than in previous games in the series. Most of the locations were recreated from real prototypes, in particular the Pripyat Microdistrict, the Yanov Railway Station, the Jupiter plant, and the village of Kapachi. By the way, at one time, the Jupiter plant really developed some kind of classified Item 62, but no one knows what it was, so the developers connected this secret with a Gauss rifle. Stalker, Call of Pripyat, impresses with the richness of its inner world, the sophistication of the locations, and the perfection of the narrative design, which unites this entire wild world of the zone with a plot, creating the same mystical, frightening atmosphere that draws you in. Everything that players could not love about Clear Sky was cut from the second add-on, and everything that fans loved about Shadow of Chernobyl was reduced to the absolute and brought to the ideal. In particular, the music. Ukrainian composer Oleksiy Omelchuk was responsible for the soundtrack to Call of Pripyat. Ambient, drone, and industrial, which have already become classic genres, were this time diversified with alternative rock and soft rock performed by the Ukrainian heavy metal band Fire.Lake. The main soundtrack this time was tense and scary. The composition written for Z.A.L.K.E.R is practically a cult for the entire Stalker series, and the composition for Jupiter still gives you goosebumps with its eerie sound. The game's soundtrack, lasting 52.5 minutes, was released as an album on October 2nd, 2009, and distributed with the game. Ultimately, Stalker, Call of Pripyat became exactly the sequel to the original game that everyone was waiting for and that most fans wanted to return to again. The system requirements of the game were known to fans since May 2009, so those who wanted to play the new game could prepare in advance. In addition, the requirements were not as high as before, and users were actively waiting for the game. How did its release turn out? Was it successful? Now we will answer these questions, but first we would like to remind you that you can subscribe to our channel and press the bell button to be a true and loyal stalker of PressX. This way you can always stay up to date with all the news of our channel and not miss the release of new videos. Your activity helps develop and promote our channel and YouTube trends, so subscribe, press the bell, and we will continue. By the fall of 2009, the main development of Stalker Call of Pripyat, which lasted about a year and a half, was completed. On September 11th, the developers released a game trailer, which was in the horror genre and promised fans of the series to return to the original atmosphere of Stalker. And on September 15th, GSC Game World published a press release where it was announced that Call of Pripyat had gone to print. A week before the official game release, on September 25th, pirates were able to steal a special add-on version of the game, which required the installed version of Stalker Shadow of Chernobyl, or Stalker Clear Sky on the computer. Well, this probably shouldn't surprise anyone. It didn't surprise anyone that the pirates managed to bypass the Starforce protection system, and the game ended up on torrents on the same day. It seems that this time even the developers themselves weren't worried about the game being leaked. Presumably, at that time their minds were completely occupied with something else. As planned, the game was released on October 2nd, 2009, and the very next day, October 3rd, the Stalker Subculture Festival organized by GSC Game World, Stalker Fest 2009, started in Kiev. The festival took place on Independence Square from 12 to 2200 hours, and admission was free for everyone.
Stalker на Майдані.
Stalker Fest 2009 стартує! Погнали!
In addition to a musical concert, various shows, contests, and exhibitions, a mass demonstration of the fresh Call of Pripyat was organized on this day for fans with the opportunity to test the game themselves. In addition, the festival had a laser tag zone. A gala concert began at 5:30 p.m., featuring musicians who participated in the recording of the soundtrack for the Stalker series and other famous Ukrainian performers. And before the festival closed, there was a laser light show in the sky. Around the stage stood a long stand of the Art Zone, with sketches from the development of Stalker Oblivion Lost, collages, as well as the best fan wallpapers from the official website. It is noteworthy that many visitors to the festival came in Stalker costumes. Therefore, towards the evening, the organizers invited everyone who wanted to go on stage and demonstrate their outfits. In short, the presentation of the game took place in a fun and grand manner. Moreover, at that time, advertising for Stalker and the festival was almost everywhere. Store windows, posters in the subway and on billboards, promos on TV and radio, everything around and on every corner shouted to the community that a new Stalker had been released. Critics gave the game a decent rating, giving it an average of 8.5 out of 10. The ratings were significantly higher than Clear Sky, but slightly lower than the original Stalker Shadow of Chernobyl. The American publication GameSpot said of Call of Pripyat, "This is the most stable Stalker game yet, and it's also the most atmospheric and exciting." Even publications that were against any new sequel to the series after the failure of the first add-on took their words back and highly praised Call of Pripyat. Despite positive reviews of the game's AI system, GameSpot noted that sometimes during combat, the AI seemed unfairly good. Enemies standing far away from you have a supernatural ability to notice when you look out the window behind them, and are also surprisingly accurate shooters in the dark, even without a night vision scope. However, even despite this, the game was praised because it was not perceived as unfair. Instead, it was perceived as one of the 100 best games of all time according to PC Gamer magazine in 2011. It was perceived as a game that needs a sequel, given the words of Serhiy Grigorovich about Stalker 2. And fans looked at the prospect of a full-fledged continuation of the series extremely optimistically, but it never appeared. In 2010, GSC Game World CEO Serhiy Grigorovich stated, "After the official sales of the series exceeded 4 million copies worldwide, we had no doubts about starting to create a new big game in the Stalker universe. This will be the next chapter of the mega-popular game that players expect from us." On August 13, 2010, GSC officially announced the upcoming game. But soon, not just the news, even the rumors about the sequel that was being prepared, disappeared. Numerous layoffs and a general outflow of personnel during the game development led to the fact that the number of GSC employees decreased by 75%. A year and a half later, Grigorovich announced the cessation of development of all projects for personal reasons, presumably due to financial problems. The developers planned the release of Stalker 2 for 2012, but instead of the game in 2012, fans received the official cancellation of the project and the actual closure of the studio. There is probably no other game in the world like Stalker, Shadow of Chernobyl. It is difficult to find a game in the post-apocalypse genre with a more dramatic plot than Clear Sky. And there is nowhere in the world more atmospheric than Call of Pripyat. There are not even games that are similar in spirit to the original Stalker trilogy. That is why, despite a bunch of bugs, errors, and all sorts of imperfections, Stalker is loved and respected all over the world. The developers desperately wanted to continue the franchise, but circumstances turned out the way they did. As of 2010, the sales of the series reached 4 million copies, half of which fell on Shadow of Chernobyl. In 2021, it became known that sales of the series had exceeded 15 million copies. Today, this is not the last significance, because only in the spring of 2024, the Stalker series reached the PlayStation 4 and Xbox One consoles, as well as the PlayStation 5 and Xbox Series XS through backward compatibility, and in the fall of 2024 it also settled on the Nintendo Switch. The exact number of sales is not known today, but we are sure that the release of Stalker 2, Heart of Chernobyl will be much larger and more successful than the original trilogy. Wait, what's Stalker 2? It was cancelled and the studio closed down. What Vostok Games? What happened to GSC Game World, and what do Stalker 2 and the online shooter Servarium have in common? We will talk about all this and what awaited the developers after the announcement of Stalker 2, Heart of Chernobyl, another time, in our next video dedicated to the ups and downs of the Stalker series. And today's video has come to an end. Don't forget to like it and share your opinion in the comments. You can also watch the video that just appeared on your screen or go to the channel and choose any other of our videos. There's a lot of interesting stuff there. Thank you for watching this video to the end. As always, it was PressX. See you soon. X.